Hi, guys, it's Carlo here. Thank you for listening to our latest episode. It's the support of our community like you that allows us to continue to grow and make this into something truly extraordinary. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to listen to it without the interruption of ads and maybe even experience some bonus content, I'd invite you to join us on our newly launched Patreon. And if maybe that's not something you can do right now, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting on places like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that good stuff. You'll find us under @millennials and community for pretty much all of those. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Millennials and Community Podcast. Let them eat cereal. On this week's episode of InfoMAC, join Matt and Carlo as they talk all about the Kelloggs Boycott and why this could either be the start of a huge movement to strike back against greedy corporations or just another hopeless attempt at a sense of control. Thank you for being part of our community.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another InfoMAC, where we take the time to explore some current events going on in our world, what we as millennials can do about it, and just a little bit of information, so hopefully you can have a bit more context, nuanced information on some of today's hottest button topics. So today we are going to be exploring one that you might have noticed in the grocery store without even noticing in the grocery store. So I'm going to toss it right over to Carlo to get us started. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about something that I'm actually really excited about, and it's the Kellogg's Boycott. Now, if you haven't heard about this, basically the Kellogg CEO went on the news and started talking about a new ad campaign that they were running, and it was the idea of breakfast for dinner. And they popped out a whole advertising campaign for it where they're saying, hey, cereal is something that is arguably pretty cost effective when you compare it to things like, the example he used was chicken. And arguably, sure, a box of cereal here in Canada, if it's a big family-sized box, you're probably looking at about $14, where, a thing of chicken might be $25 or $30. And when he was kind of bringing up this idea of cereal for dinner, the interview that I saw him in, the anchor was going, well, are you sure that this is going to come across as good as you think it will? Because we're in a really high cost of living time right now. People are using food banks more than ever. They're struggling a little bit. So do you think that this is going to come across as good as you think it will? And his response is, oh yeah, this is going to be received very, very well. We are a cost leader, and I think people are going to appreciate that they can still get cereal for a reasonable price. And this received a lot of backlash. It is arguable that cereal is not a substitute for a high quality protein. It is not, it's part of a balanced breakfast. It's not the entire breakfast. It's certainly not the entire dinner. And people are upset. And I guess my first question that I would say to you before I go into the repercussions that have followed behind this, Matt, is how do you feel about the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company coming on the news and basically just saying, hey, it's okay, you can't afford your groceries. You can eat our processed cardboard anyways.
You know what? I think that there's a lot of levels to this, and I in preparation for the episode, I went and watched the interview, but I watched the interview after going and seeing a lot of the backlash that's going on in social media. And so often, I think this exemplifies a lot of what we see now, where social media gets a hold of something and runs with it. Now, I totally agree that the idea of a campaign where you're trying to position cereal for dinner is problematic on a couple of levels. Number one, on a nutrition standpoint, you're absolutely right. The idea that you're going to use cereal as a way to replace or meal substitute for adequate balance of any sort of macronutrient is super problematic, super laughable, to be honest. But that being said, when we really unpack what he's saying, he's trying to create a promotional strategy for his product. Now, he did not necessarily do a good job of being empathetic towards people in certain low socioeconomic situations. He suggested that cereal is the most affordable thing, which, given the context of the fact that year over year from October 2022 to October 2023, cereal prices went up at least 17%. And you look at kind of those gross numbers over the 4 years of the pandemic, Kellogg's products have spiked in price. But at the end of the day, his role as CEO is also to promote his work and promote his products. So I agree with you in that, certainly he came across as incredibly privileged, incredibly entitled, being out of touch with the people who are his target demographic as a consumer. But my first impression when I watched the video was as condemning as going to be, having heard the rhetoric and the backlash before watching the interview itself.
And I think that's a fair point. Like, that's his job. He is supposed to promote the sale of his product for all of the reasons that would make him the CEO. But I think, unfortunately, he is the victim of being one of the most recent examples of these CEOs and these large companies being completely out of touch with what is going on in the world right now. Whether it be the mass amount of layoffs, the stuff that we've been hearing from these various tech firms of leaked calls where they're talking about, well, there'll be no bonuses this year because you're not working hard enough. Don't ask about your bonus. Ask about what you can do for the company to help it out of this spot. Other companies talking about, laying all these people off, but meanwhile, we're giving massive bonuses to our management. I think he was just the most recent in this line of frustration, and I think that he didn't really give it enough thought to think, how are people going to look at this? I think he looked at it as, my shareholders will love the idea of this new campaign, but he didn't think, well, what about the people that actually buy my product? Are they going to like the new ad campaign? And so the thing that's very interesting for me was, of course, there was a lot of low-level backlash, but there was one particular creator on TikTok, and I'm going to link her profile and her original video, if I can find it, in the show notes. But she basically came on, listed all the things I just talked about, and she said, look, so the only way that we can seem to get it through to these companies that this is not okay, because they don't seem to understand, is by voting with our wallets. And as with almost everything in the economic world we live in, the only way that you can make a big difference is by voting with your money. Well, how do we do that on a grand scale? A boycott. Now, this was not just because of his comments. That most definitely spurred it on. But the other thing that this content creator was really pointing out was that the manufacturing process of cereal in general, but most specifically in this case Kellogg's products, has a lot of byproducts and chemicals that are not found in the cereals of other countries. The example she used was the United Kingdom. They're not allowed to have a lot of the products that are in the cereal that are in the United States. Now, I don't know if we have them here in Canada in our products. I'm not a big cereal eater. I haven't looked, but I would imagine that we probably have at least some of them. So the boycott was, look, we're going to boycott for 3 months. It's supposed to start April 1st. It has not officially started. And it was going to demand 3 things. Lower the cost of your products by 25%, which arguably you can do because you're continuing to post record profits. You're not allowed to lay anyone off during this cost reduction or this price reduction. It's supposed to come out of your profits. And stop making your cereal out of arguably toxic and harmful chemicals just because it's cheaper. Those were the 3 demands. It was supposed to be a 3-month-long boycott starting in April. And I'm going to be honest, I'm all for it. I think those are very reasonable demands. And again, I don't think that it's picking hate on Kellogg's because of this one particular thing. I just think that was the the flame that lit the whole thing on fire, was that he made this comment and people kind of had enough of it. And I remember seeing this TikTok and going, that is a great idea. It's a shame it won't happen. because arguably to organize a large group of people in a way such as this is a very difficult thing to do. But it's actually seems to be taking hold. This particular content creator's following has exploded massively. She's had lots of people from Kellogg's that work within Kellogg's reach out and provide additional information that they can use for the boycott. And she's, whatever her background is professionally, she's gathering the resources, talking to the right people in preparation for April 1st, including showing off all of the sub-brands of Kellogg's, and making people aware that, if you really truly do want to change the way things are going, we got to vote with our wallets, and we're going to do it in the most organized way possible.
Now, there are a number of different, as a lot of these topics, what makes them so juicy and makes them a target for us to talk about in our InfoMAC. There's a lot of different ways we can go, right? This has, as we've touched on already, implications on nutrition and the accountability that companies, particularly of non-perishable foods, have to create products or market their products as nutritious when they certainly are not. Forget the toxic chemical piece, which you talked about, which is certainly alarming, but even to take it back to more of the basic nutritional value, the sugar content and the carbohydrates content of these products certainly is not as nutritious as these companies would like to promote or like to have you believe. So there's that piece. There's certainly the hyper-capitalistic piece of it, right? As you say, executives certainly are not looking out for the consumer or their customers first. They're looking for their shareholders. Of this CEO's base salary was $600,000 last year, but somehow total compensation was $5 million, right? So that tells you that there's a significant amount of the total compensation that's linked to the value of the company. So, but that's not new, right? And that's not to say that Kellogg's is unique in that regard. What I'm fascinated to see, though, for speaking as someone who's like a business student at heart, theoretically the market is supposed to correct itself on these things, right? So the idea of capitalism, the idea of market economics, is when companies do badly, that they are reprimanded through the free actions of the free market. And it's really, really interesting to see somebody trying to stage a coup, essentially, and artificially ramp up the speed at which free market economics takes a role in punishing someone who is deemed to be a bad actor. I personally don't think it's going to work. I think you might see a temporary blip in the budget revenue lines, and maybe it turns out that the second quarter, maybe third quarter revenue projections or profitability of Kellogg suffers, but I can't imagine that this is going to have a long-term impact in the way that they do their business. And certainly we could also, and maybe this merits doing a larger episode about, it speaks to cancel culture and the validity of cancel culture. So I think that while this is done for a admirable purpose, I think that there's certain problematic pieces. And you spoke to me about one example of this, but I think that this will illustrate the power of an independent or individual consumer, which, when it comes to products like non-perishable foods, there are much more significant buyers with more purchasing power that you would need to have on board to make decisions like this stick. Do you want to go in and touch on some of those bigger groups that have more purchasing power that admittedly this content creator is trying to target, trying to influence in hopes of making this a bigger thing, but until these groups are on board, it probably won't have a huge impact?
Yeah, and I do want to point out that one of the big things that this content creator is trying to make us aware is that the boycott initially is supposed to be 3 months. But if the demands are not met, they intend to extend it. Now, whether the validity of that is there or not, because people will get tired of not being able to enjoy, the food that they want to enjoy. And, there was, in this one particular case that she spoke about, a person from Kellogg's that reached out and said, hey, one of Kellogg's biggest purchasers is actually the schools. They serve their products to your children. So she then put out a call to say, hey, what you need to do is reach out to your child's school and tell them that you are not comfortable with them serving Kellogg's products to your children. And, that may put some additional pressure on you to now supply them with breakfast before they leave the house, or, if that school is not willing to make a change, because arguably the school board would have to go through a very large vetting and various other processes to make a change that drastic very quickly is unlikely, right? But that's kind of the point, is that she wants to encourage everybody to inconvenience ourselves now in a small way to hopefully make things better in a large way. Because her hope is that when we show this company that is Kellogg's that a large change could be made and that people could be organized and could cause a big, slump in sales, that other companies will realize, oh, we don't want to be next, right? So I totally agree with you. And, this kind of segues really nicely, I think, into some of the actual repercussion and some of the things that are starting to happen. There are already lots of videos showing up of people refusing to purchase Kellogg's products and instead creating an environment of how to recreate that product yourself. So one of the ones that I saw was how to make Rice Krispies at home. It's just deep fried rice. So this was a content creator said, well, let me show you exactly how to make this, how to make Eggos, how to do this, how to do that. And that to me is the more exciting part of this, is that if we cannot enact the change on a short term by not purchasing the product, can we create an environment where of all things we stop purchasing products and instead make them ourselves? Because arguably deep fried rice, you buy a thing of rice, you put it in some hot oil, it creates a Rice Krispie, is going to be significantly less exposed to harsh chemicals than the one you would find in the cereal. And that's the more exciting thing to me.
Yeah, and that certainly is something that we see as a generational trend, and certainly folks that I'm connected to in rural communities, at least here in Alberta, this is largely an approach that they're taking to try to stem the tide against rising food prices. You see it with a return or resurgence of community gardens. You see a really, really cool trend in some southern Alberta communities, specifically Longview, Alberta, where there are different canning classes and looking at different ways of creating opportunities for bringing back traditional methods of preserving foods. And this is a really cool opportunity for us to really look at different ways that we can step away from the grocery store in some respects, but also take more accountability for the food that we're putting into our bodies. So certainly a good opportunity, if cereals being among them, for that to happen.
Yeah. And my hope is that, and one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about this on an InfoMAC was that I think for a long time people have just become accustomed to, well, that's the way it is, right? I'm just one person. I don't really have the ability to enact any change. We're going to see whether we can actually, this woman can organize people enough and enact a large enough change. I think it'll be a really cool case study, if nothing else. But if it gets people thinking on a grander scale that we don't just have to accept the way things are, that we can enact change, that we can, even on a small personal level, say, I'm going to stop purchasing that company's product. I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to learn how to do things, make things for myself, fend for myself in this regard. I think that's a skill set that is largely forgotten and somewhat fallen by the wayside over the last couple generations with how consumeristic we have become. And I want people to just realize that they can do more themselves than I think they realize they can.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important takeaway. And I would also suggest, too, that Um, Before we get too far down the path of trying to punish these massive corporations, just understanding again what the actual impact of a single buyer means. And I think that, certainly your purchasing power should reflect the values and the beliefs that you have as an individual with the ways in which certain companies align themselves, whether it be the way in which they make their product or the places in which they do business or the political affiliations, like whatever that is. You should certainly make sure that your values align with that. But I don't want anyone to be fooling themselves as to the impact that them as an individual has on the actual bottom line that these massive, massive corporations have. And so instead, I think it definitely behooves people to instead think about what's best for themselves and their families and act in the best regard that way, as opposed to trying to use or not use your wallet to try to punish these massive corporations, because by and large, individual decisions aren't going to do that. Case in point, did you know that this is not the first Kellogg's boycott?
I did not know that. Enlighten me.
Doing a little bit of a meta InfoMAC while in session. So it turns out that this is not the first time. And Kellogg's has actually been the center of controversy on several occasions. The most memorable one was at the end of 2016. They received a huge amount of backlash for advertising Kellogg's products, Special K, other cereals, things like that, on a website that was seen as being racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, and they received a huge amount of backlash. And of course, later part of 2016, this was also when Trump was elected in the United States. So there was all of these super politicized pieces, and so Kellogg's got caught up in it in terms of having ad space for their products running on this website that was incredibly hyper politicized and seemed to be anti-Semitic, racist, etc. And the fact that it's, granted, there's a lot that's happened in the last 7 years. However, it's important to note too that these things are so cyclical, and corporations go through these periods of pressure, and again, just reinforcing the point that it's more important to do what's best for us and our families, because in all likelihood, in 1 year, 3 years, 7 years from now, when it's time for Kellogg's next controversy, it's unlikely that we are to necessarily remember this specific instance.
It's true, and I have to give this content creator, if I recall correctly, the tall girl is her handle. I have to give her credit, because in her original kind of call for this, she did say, look, if you're a person that has a specific reason to purchase this product, maybe you have a child with special needs and that's a hyperfixation of theirs, perhaps it is all you can afford or all that is available in your area, fine. But it was more a call to action for some people that, are arguably upper middle class and above, saying, if you can buy the store brand Eggo, do that instead of the actual Eggo kind of thing. Now, of course, to your point, it's likely that store brand Eggo is made by Kellogg's. So it's a tough one, and I'm not terribly hopeful of the outcome. In a perfect world, I think that we could band together and show this massive amount of change, and this, it would be as impactful to Kellogg's as these people hope that it would be, and that all of a sudden they would change their tune. But like you said, it is unlikely. We have to be realistic about it. I will enjoy watching this as it unfolds to see what happens. And, part of what we've already seen is that, there's these big displays of Kellogg's products on sale. There was one I saw where a box of cereal was down to $1. And, whether that was a short-term thing because this one particular store brought in a large amount of stock and couldn't sell it, or it was, something that is responsible because of this, we don't know. But I'm going to be watching it and hoping that this is somewhat of a message, even if it's just one on the surface level, to these companies, that people as a whole are getting very tired of how expensive things are, and are getting tired of hearing about massive bonuses and massive corporate profits. When there are people lining up around food banks, there's fights at food banks for food. I heard a story recently of a food bank where the police and the SWAT team had to be called in because of a upheaval when the food bank said, "We're food." So I think there's so many things to be alarmed about, and I hope that we can see some change soon for these. It is very frustrating to see how expensive something that is a necessity for life is, but realism is unfortunately part of being an adult and an important thing. So I totally get what you're saying.
So certainly something interesting to keep in mind, and hopefully it makes for all of our listeners and viewers a mundane trip to the grocery store the next time a little bit more interesting, a little bit more thought-provoking. But is there anything else you want to leave us with before we close out this InfoMAC?
I think that voting with your wallet, as I said before, is very, very important, if only to fit the morality and the values that you have that Matt said, because there are many scenarios in my life that I have been unhappy with the actions of a company and chosen to vote with my wallet. And even though I know that probably didn't make a large change to the balance books of that company, it did feel very good and empowering to me. So if that's something you've never done before, I'd encourage you to do it, whether it be with Kellogg's or anything else. You don't have to just blindly purchase something you don't want to purchase. You don't have to shop somewhere you don't want to shop. If you choose to be vocal about it, be vocal. If you choose to be silent, be silent. But do what fits your comfort and your morality, because I think at the end of the day, that's one of the most important things.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's an important way to live our lives in many regards, and not just in the way we show up at the grocery store.
Absolutely.
So with that, everyone, this has been another InfoMAC. Once again, InfoMACs are these quick hits designed to help you hopefully become more informed and more curious, and give you an opportunity to go out and seek out those answers to those things that are happening right now in today's world. As always, hopefully you have a chance to check us out on all of our social media platforms, our Discord channel, our TikToks, our Instagram, and would love to connect with all of you there. Until next time, take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.